Here is the story you have been told about Netflix. A couple of guys were annoyed about a late fee on a rented copy of Apollo 13. So they built a company that mailed you DVDs in little red envelopes, then beamed movies straight into your living room, then made its own shows. And somewhere along the way, it killed the video store, humbled Hollywood, and turned binge watching into a verb people use without irony. $13 a month, no ads, the whole world's entertainment in a red rectangle on your television. A subscription business. Clean, simple, elegant. You pay, they stream, everyone is happy. The nerds beat the studios. The little guy won. That version is not wrong exactly. It is just carefully incomplete in the way a magician's patter is incomplete, because the thing you are actually subscribing to is not a movie service. It is one of the most aggressive borrowing operations in modern corporate history, wearing the costume of a place to watch television. And once you understand what is really moving underneath the red rectangle, you will never look at that monthly charge the same way again. Let me give you the number that breaks the fairy tale. For most of the decade in which Netflix supposedly conquered the world, it was not making money. It was setting money on fire deliberately as a strategy and calling it a plan. In 2019, the year before the pandemic supercharged everything, Netflix generated around $20 billion in revenue and reported a healthy accounting profit of nearly $2 billion. It also burned through more than $3 billion in cash that same year. Not lost on paper. Gone from the bank. The company was spending far more actual money than it took in, every single quarter, for years on end, while telling shareholders it was profitable the entire time. And here's the uncomfortable part. Both statements were true. The profit was real by the rules of accounting. The cash bonfire was real by the rules of arithmetic. That gap between them, the space between what Netflix earned on paper and what it spent in cash, is not a footnote. It is where the entire real business lives. So let us talk about how you actually enter this business and why almost nobody on earth can, no matter how good their app is. Because the barrier to entry here is one of the most misunderstood things in modern media. Netflix is not expensive to run because of servers. This surprises people. Streaming a video file is cheap, and it gets cheaper every year as bandwidth costs fall. Netflix even gives internet providers its own caching boxes for free, so the video sits closer to your house. The pipes are close to a solved problem. Netflix is expensive because of what it puts into those pipes. In a single recent year, the company committed roughly $17 billion to content. Read that again. Not to buildings, not to salaries for its famous engineers, not to marketing, though that number is huge too. $17 billion to make and license things for you to watch in 1 year. That is larger than the entire annual revenue of most companies, whose names you know, spent every 12 months. Purely to keep the library from going stale while you scroll past 300 titles and land on the same comfort show you have already seen 4 times. And this is the first real trap for anyone who dreams of competing. The cost of entry is not a clever piece of software. Anyone with a modest team can build a competent video player. The cost of entry is convincing a bank or the global bond market to hand you tens of billions of dollars up front, years before you will ever earn a cent of it back, purely on the promise that strangers will keep paying you a small monthly fee for a very, very long time. Netflix did exactly this. It went to the bond markets again and again and raised well over $15 billion in debt to fund its content machine, borrowing against a future it had not lived yet. That is not a technology problem. It is a financing problem dressed up as a technology company. And Netflix understood it was a financing problem a full decade before its competitors did, which turned out to matter more than any show it ever made. And there is a second hidden layer to this cost that never even appears cleanly on the balance sheet, and it is the one that should make you nervous. When Netflix signs a deal to license a show or greenlights a multi-year production slate, it commits to paying for content it has not yet received and you have not yet watched. Those are contractual obligations, real money owed, and they have run well north of $20 billion in future commitments at a time. So the $17 billion spent in a year is only the part you can see. Behind it sits a mountain of promises to pay, stretching years forward, locked in before a single frame is shot. Netflix does not just spend enormous sums, it pre-commits to spending enormous sums it does not yet have. which is only survivable if the subscribers keep arriving to pay for promises made in the past. Then there was the cost almost everyone forgets because Netflix made it look effortless, going global. To justify that content spend, Netflix needed the largest possible audience to spread it across, which meant launching in 130 countries in a single stretch. Dubbing and subtitling in dozens of languages, and spending years in most of those markets acquiring subscribers faster than it earned from them. International expansion was itself a second cash bonfire layered on top of the first. For a long while, every new territory was a fresh loss leader, a bet that today's marketing spend in Brazil or India or Poland would become tomorrow's profitable low-churn subscriber. The company was running two enormous gambles at once, borrowing to make content and borrowing to reach the audience that would eventually maybe pay for it. So here's the puzzle at the center of everything. How does a company spend $17 billion in cash on content, report a profit anyway, and not simply collapse under the contradiction? This is the mechanism. This is the engine nobody points a camera at. And once you see how it turns, you cannot unsee it in any subscription business you ever encounter again. When Netflix spends, say, $500 million making a prestige show, it does not count that $500 million as an expense the moment it writes the checks. Under accounting rules, that finished show is not treated as a cost at all. It is treated as an asset. Think of it this way. A physical DVD sitting in a warehouse's inventory. It has value, it will be sold, so it lives on the balance sheet, not the expense line. A Netflix original sitting on a server is, in the eyes of the accountants, the same species of thing. It has value. It will attract and retain subscribers over time. So Netflix places it on the balance sheet, exactly like a factory that just bought an expensive machine. And then it spreads the cost of that show out. Over the years, it expects people to keep watching it. This spreading out is called amortization, and I want you to remember that word because it is the single most important word in the entire company. Amortization is the trick that lets the cash bonfire and the paper profit coexist. Watch precisely what it does. In year one, Netflix pays the full $500 million in cash to make the show. That money is gone from the bank the instant production wraps. But on the profit statement, the thing shareholders obsess over, Netflix might only record $150 million of that as a cost this year, arguing the show will keep drawing viewers for several years to come. So the cash flow statement screams catastrophe minus $500 million, while the profit statement calmly murmurs, everything is fine, only minus 150. Now multiply that single trick across thousands of titles made and licensed over many years, all amortizing at once on staggered schedules. What you get is the exact photograph of 2010's Netflix. Wildly profitable on paper, hemorrhaging cash in reality, and completely strategically fine with it. Because the entire plan was to grow the number of paying subscribers faster than the debt piled up to fund the shows those subscribers came for. Which reveals the real product. It is not the shows. The shows are the bait. The product Netflix actually sells, the thing it sells to Wall Street, is a subscriber who does not cancel. Every original series, every algorithm tweak, every thumbnail tested 40 different ways. Every autoplaying next episode that starts before you have decided whether you want it exists to accomplish one single objective. Lower the odds that you click cancel this month. In this business, that number has a name and it governs everything. Churn. The percentage of your customers who leave in a given period. Netflix is not, at its core, an entertainment company. It is a churn reduction company that produces entertainment as its chosen method of reducing churn. Think carefully about why that has to be true, because it is the load-bearing wall of the whole structure. A subscriber costs real money to acquire. Marketing to reach them, a discount to tempt them, the free or cheap first taste. Call the cost of landing one customer the acquisition cost. If that subscriber stays 2 months and quits, you lost money on them, flat out. If they stay 6 years, they are almost pure profit for the last 5.5 of them. So the true value of Netflix is not this month's revenue at all. It is the estimated lifetime value of the average customer, stretched years into the future, and that single estimate is what justifies borrowing $17 billion today to make shows. The content spend is not a cost in the emotional sense. It is a bet. And the bet is precise. It is a wager that the average person, once they are inside and settled, stays far, far longer than it costs to get them in the door. Every dollar spent on content is really a dollar spent buying down your personal probability of leaving. That is what you are on the balance sheet, a probability. Now you can finally understand why Netflix behaves the way it does, including the choices that look completely insane from the outside. Why cancel a beloved show after only 2 seasons while fans are writing furious petitions? Because a third season is enormously expensive, and the cold data says the specific people who love that show were never going to cancel anyway. You cannot reduce churn that is already sitting near zero. The money is far better spent on a brand new show that hooks a different kind of subscriber. Someone on the fence, someone who might actually leave without a fresh reason to stay. Netflix is not making television decisions when it does this. It is making churn math decisions, and the television is simply the visible residue those decisions leave behind. The show you loved was not canceled because it failed. It was canceled because it succeeded at retaining people who were already safe. But here is where this elegant machine turns genuinely dangerous. Because a business built on borrowing and amortization has structural traps welded inside it that can kill an operator who does absolutely everything right. The first trap is the treadmill, and it is merciless. Because content is amortized, last year's spending is still sitting on this year's books as a cost. And the year after that. You are perpetually paying on the profit statement for shows you finished and released long ago. So to keep growing your profits, you cannot simply hold your content spend steady. You have to keep feeding the machine new subscribers just to outrun the accumulating dead weight of old content costs still grinding through amortization. The instant subscriber growth slows, the amortization does not slow with it. It keeps marching forward, booking costs for last year's ambitions, and the whole beautiful illusion inverts. The paper profits that amortization once protected now get crushed by the ghosts of shows past. The trick that saved you starts to bury you. That is not a hypothetical fear. In early 2022, Netflix reported something it had not reported in more than a decade. It lost subscribers, not gained fewer than analysts hoped, actually lost them on a net basis for the first time in 10 years. 200,000 gone in a single quarter, paired with a warning that 2 million more were about to walk out in the next one. And the market did not treat this as a merely disappointing quarter. The stock collapsed by more than a third in a single trading day, and shed the large majority of its value across that year, hundreds of billions in market value evaporating. Why such a violent reaction to a small dip? Because investors suddenly did the terrifying arithmetic out loud, all at the same moment. If the subscriber number stops going up, then the entire justification for the borrowing and the amortization and the sky-high lifetime value estimates, every assumption underneath the debt, comes into question all at once. The treadmill only works while you are still running on it. Stop running and it throws you off the back. The second trap is the one the competitors walked directly into, eyes open, and it is even more instructive. For years, Netflix did not make most of its own shows. It licensed them, and cheaply. It paid Disney and Warner and NBC and everyone else for the right to stream their existing libraries. And those old studios happily pocketed the money, because to them, streaming looked like pleasing out a spare room. Nice extra income beside the real business of cinemas, cable bundles, and box office. Then they looked up and watched Netflix use their own shows, the ones they had rented out so casually, to build a global audience of hundreds of millions of loyal viewers, and they panicked. So they yanked their content back off Netflix and launched their own competing services. Disney Plus, Max, Peacock, Paramount Plus, each one spending billions to replicate the model they had watched work, and almost every single one of them has been bleeding money, some of them billions a year in streaming losses. This is the structural trap the whole format exists to reveal. The studios believed Netflix's advantage was the content itself. It was not. The content was always for sale. Anyone could rent it. They had rented it. Netflix's real advantage was that it started borrowing and building scale a full decade before anyone else took the threat seriously. So, by the time the competitors finally arrived, out of breath, Netflix had close to 300 million subscribers to spread its $17 billion in content costs across. Each new competitor had perhaps 30 million subscribers trying to spread a broadly similar content cost. Sit with that. The math that works beautifully at 300 million subscribers is an outright catastrophe at 30 million. The same enormous spend, but a tenth of the customers to pay for it, which means the cost per subscriber is 10 times worse. They did not lose because their shows were bad. Some were excellent. They lost because they showed up to a financing race 10 years late carrying a tenth of the scale. And scale was the only thing that was ever going to win it. Which brings us to the twist that tells you Netflix itself quietly knows the pure growth story is ending. For its entire existence, Netflix sold one promise above all others. No ads. Ever. That was the identity, that was the whole point, the clean escape from cable's endless commercial breaks. And then, without much fanfare, it started selling ads, launching a cheaper tier stuffed with them. It cracked down hard on password sharing, converting tens of millions of freeloading borrowers into paying accounts. Wringing fresh revenue out of the base it already had rather than chasing new subscribers who, in the rich world, have mostly run out. These are not the moves of a company that still believes it can grow subscribers forever. These are the moves of a company that has run low on easy new people to sign up, and is now turning methodically to squeeze more money out of every person already inside. The engine is shifting right in front of us, from growth to extraction. And that shift is quietly the most honest thing Netflix has ever told you about itself. So let me give you two endings, because from here, this business can genuinely go two ways. And the entire difference between them comes down to that treadmill and whether it keeps running forward. In the version that works, Netflix has essentially already won and is now collecting. The desperate borrowing years are behind it. It now generates real, enormous cash, billions of dollars in genuine free cash flow because the content spend has finally stabilized while revenue keeps climbing through the ad tier. Through password enforcement, through annual price increases the audience grumbles about but grudgingly absorbs anyway. The scale advantage becomes permanent and self-reinforcing. Competitors merge out of exhaustion, retreat to smaller niches, or license their prized shows right back to Netflix, the very company that nearly destroyed them, because Netflix is now the only buyer large enough to pay a serious price. Netflix stops being a volatile growth story and quietly becomes what the cable giants used to be. A toll booth on entertainment itself. Boring, dominant, deeply embedded in your monthly budget, and enormously profitable precisely because it is boring. In this ending, the mountain of debt was never recklessness. It was simply the price of admission for getting there first, and it has been paid in full. In the version that fails, the extraction comes too fast and cuts too deep. The password crackdown, the ads, the steady price hikes all quietly remind people of a dangerous truth they had forgotten. The thing they are paying for every month is optional. It is a want, not a need. And so churn creeps upward. And churn, remember, is poison to this specific machine above all others because the entire $17 billion content bet was underwritten by one assumption: that subscribers stay for years. If they instead start leaving after months, the lifetime value estimate collapses, and with it the justification for the whole scale of spending. Netflix would then have to cut content to protect its cash, but a thinner, staler library gives people even less reason to stay, which raises churn further, which forces still deeper cuts, and so on, downward. The treadmill runs backwards, and the very same amortization that once so elegantly flattered its profits would, in reverse, methodically bury them. Booking the costs of a glorious past against the revenue of a shrinking present? Here's the one thing I want you to hold on to after everything else fades. Netflix did not win because it made better shows than Hollywood. For years, honestly, it made worse ones, a flood of forgettable filler between the occasional hit. It won because it understood, earlier and more completely than anyone else alive, that streaming was never really a technology business and was never even really an entertainment business. It was a financing business wearing entertainment as a disguise convincing enough to fool the entire industry it was about to eat. The company that could borrow the most, the earliest, and then convince the most people to keep paying a small amount for the longest possible time, would win the whole thing. and everyone else would be left holding a beautiful, expensive library they could no longer afford to carry. Netflix ran that particular race alone for 10 years while the giants laughed at the DVD company. They're all still trying to catch a business that was never actually selling them movies. It was selling the one thing that becomes almost impossible to compete with once a single player